So this mini lesson is the beginning of chapter 6, which is based on metabolism, free energy, and ATP. So we'll go through these three things today. Let's go ahead and start off and describe what is metabolism. Metabolism is basically just all of the chemical reactions that are occurring in your body. So you might, think that you have a slower metabolism or a faster metabolism. And so it just is based on the number of reactions that occur within your body. So when we take a look at different reactions that are occurring, a metabolic pathway begins with some sort of specific molecule and ends with a product, with each step being catalyzed by a specific enzyme. So if you take a look at our reaction down here, we actually have three reactions occurring to create the end product. So the starting molecule undergoes a reaction to change into some sort of product. Then that product undergoes a different reaction to form a new product. And then that new product undergoes another chemical reaction to form the final product. So in order to create that end product, it took three different reactions to occur in a specific step-by-step manner. And so that's a metabolic pathway. Now, there's different types of pathways or reactions. So some of them are catabolic pathways, some of them are anabolic pathways. So a catabolic pathway releases energy by breaking down complex molecules into simpler ones, whereas an anabolic pathway consumes energy to build complex molecules from simpler ones. So one way that I remember this is because I have cats, and one in particular likes to break things. So I think of catabolic as breaking down complex molecules into simpler compounds. So that means that anabolic must be uh, building complex molecules from simpler ones, and that takes energy to build something. Okay. So we're going to get into a little bit of physics. So we're going to talk about what energy is. So energy, just the definition, is the capacity to perform work. So we can describe energy as existing in two forms. So energy is either existing as potential energy or kinetic energy. So potential energy is stored energy. So it has the potential to be used, basically. So an example of potential energy would be an apple. Okay, so inside that apple, there's all sorts of sugars, right? And different carbohydrate molecules. And that's energy that could potentially be used to provide you with cellular energy later on and for movement. But when it's just as an apple, that's just a whole bunch of energy sitting there, okay? Because it's stored away as chemicals. Kinetic energy is when it's converted into some sort of movement or light or heat. So it's energy that's actually doing work. So if you ate the apple and your mitochondria converted it into ATP, and then you utilized that ATP to move. Okay, so that would be an example of kinetic energy, that movement that you're making. Okay, here's another example. We can see a dam. Okay, so this dam, all that water behind the dam is potential energy or stored energy. But once it squeezes through the dam, it's moving, so it changes into kinetic energy. And sometimes we can harness that energy, right? As it's moving through the dam. And we can harness it and transfer it into electricity via a hydroelectric conversion. Here's another example of potential and kinetic energy. So we have this diver at the top of the platform who's getting ready to dive. So that diver, it has more potential energy on the platform. And then once the diver dives into the water, the potential energy is converted into chemical energy because of the movement. Okay. And then once the diver has entered the water, he has less potential energy in the water than he did starting out. And then converting that energy back into potential energy as climbing occurs. Climbing up converts the chemical energy of the muscle movement to potential energy, to allowing the person to climb. So based on energy, there's two laws of thermodynamics that we need to understand in order for us to look at energy conversions. So for one thing, the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So it can only be converted from one form to another. So like I said in that previous example with the dam, okay, that hydroelectric dam is producing electricity. It's not creating the electricity, it's just transforming it from the kinetic energy found in the water into a usable form for us, electricity. So energy is not created or destroyed by power plants, for example. They don't make any energy. They're just converting it from one form to another. So energy is never created nor destroyed. It's just transferred or transformed from one form to another. The second law of thermodynamics states that every time we have an energy conversion from one form to another, we lose some energy in the process in the form of, usually it's heat. Okay, so it's not a 100% efficient energy conversion. So when we have, for example, a power plant. Let's say we have that power plant. Let's say it's a coal power plant. So we're burning coal in order to produce electricity. And by burning the coal, it creates steam, which causes a turbine to move, and then that's going to allow us to harness it into electricity. But it's not 100% conversion. Okay, the energy that was stored in that coal is not going to be converted into 100% electricity. Some of it's going to be lost into the environment as heat. So that exchange that's taking place, or that transformation, adds entropy to the universe, which is basically just chaos or disorder. So each change is accompanied by entropy. And that's due to that incomplete conversion from one form of energy to the other. We always lose some in the form of heat. Okay, so here's another example of the two laws of thermodynamics. We have our little grizzly bear. Little, I guess he's not little, but he's enjoying a snack. So that's demonstrating the first law of thermodynamics. In order for that bear to function, it needs chemical energy, right? So that chemical energy is brought into the grizzly by eating. So that's how we get our energy. It originated as from the food that we ate. We can't just somehow make energy within our bodies. We can convert it from, say, the nutrients that we eat into a usable form of cellular energy. And then you can see the second law, that energy can be converted from one form to the other. So we have potential energy in the form of the nutrients, then are getting converted, allowing the bear to move. And the bear is utilizing that energy and changing it from one form to the other. So it's taking the chemical in the form of sugars and converting it into carbon dioxide and water through a process known as cellular respiration. But in the process, it's not an incomplete transfer of energy from the sugars to the carbon dioxide and water. There's some heat that gets dissipated in the process. So that heat is the result of that incomplete conversion from chemical energy to another form of chemical energy. Okay, so the next concept we're going to talk about is something called free energy. So in a living system, free energy is the energy that can do work when temperature and pressure are uniform, such as in a living cell. So if we look at this equation, we can see that this sign right here, the triangle, it's a delta sign. In science or math, it stands for change. So if we have a change in G, change in free energy, that basically means that the final state minus the initial state of that energy is results in that change. So if we start out with, I don't know, 100 kilocalories of energy, and at the end we have 80 kilocalories of energy. What was the change in energy? So we subtract 80 minus 100, and so we get a negative, right? So negative 200 or negative 20 kilocalories. Okay, so this is what is termed as a spontaneous reaction because we started out with more energy than we ended up with. So this is an example of a spontaneous reaction. No energy was required to get that reaction to take place. Now, sometimes we can have the opposite occur where we need to add energy. So if the final state, let's just flip the numbers. Let's say we started with 80 kilocalories, but we ended with 100 kilocalories. Okay, so 100 minus 80, that's 20. That's a positive number. But notice, we started out with 80 and we ended up with 100. So that means somehow we gained energy. So energy had to be inputted into that equation for us to end up with more than we started with. So we would have a positive free energy, which is not spontaneous because there is energy input. Okay, so just realize that change in energy, if it's a positive number, that means that it's not spontaneous. It required energy input for that reaction to take place. If there's a negative change in energy, negative delta G, then it was a spontaneous process because we started out with more energy than we ended with. Okay, so we had plenty of energy to drive that reaction. Okay, so let's take a closer look at some examples here. So the more free energy we have, that means the higher G. Now, if we have a lot of free energy, that tends to become less stable. And so it makes it more likely for the reaction to occur. So in a spontaneous change, the free energy of the system will decrease because the change in energy is less than zero. It's a negative number. Okay, so the energy is going to be become less. And so that's going to lead to a more stable system. And then that released free energy can be harnessed to do work. Okay, and then eventually there'll be less free energy after it's done some work. So we'll end up with a lower G, which is more stable, and less work capacity will occur. So here's an example of what I was just talking about with all of this change in free energy. So in our lab, we took a look at diffusion. And actually, I guess we're going to look at it. Yeah, we looked at it last week. So in diffusion, we have the molecules. Oops, let me go back. Let me get my pen out here. We have the molecules are tight together. And we know that molecules, they want to move from high concentration to low concentration. So there's a lot of energy stored right here because these molecules don't like being so close together. They want to be able to spread apart. And so we have more free energy available at this place, and it's less stable. Those molecules don't like to be tightly packed like that. And so they're more likely to start moving. So that increases the work capacity. So as they start moving in random directions, okay, they diffuse, we end up with less free energy because we've, harnessed some of that for movement, and so it becomes more stable. Okay. Here's another example where we have a diver at the top of the diving board. So this diving board, this is a situation where we have the influence of gravity. And so this person is being about to be pulled towards the Earth's surface due to the gravitational force. And that basically we have all of this free energy, potential energy that's ready to explode, and it's less stable, and then that will cause the diver to, once he jumps, to come falling towards the water. So as he's falling towards the water, he's moving, and that's releasing that free energy for movement, and it becomes a more stable state as he dives into the water. All right. And then the last example is our chemical reaction here. So we have some sort of molecule that looks like it has some water and carbon dioxide, and it's basically a bunch of stored energy inside. And then once it undergoes that reaction, some of that energy gets released, and we have the bonds shift, and we have the separation of molecules. So it becomes more stable, less free energy there. Okay. So when we're talking about our chemical reactions, some of our reactions can be exergonic, some of them can be endergonic, and it has to do with the free energy. Okay, so exergonic means that energy is going to be released. So if you recall from 2 slides ago, if we're releasing energy, that means that we're starting out in our initial state with more free energy than we end with. Okay, so the change in free energy will be a negative number. So that would be a spontaneous reaction. Okay, so imagine we have some firewood, and we're going to have a nice campfire. So the wood itself is filled with energy. Okay, it's high in carbon. It's got, all of this carbon that when it burns, okay, produces a lot of heat, right? So when we start out with the wood, it's big, it's solid, it's, ready to go. And then we start a reaction, and the wood starts to burn and produce heat. Okay, as it's producing heat, it produces light energy, which we can see and enjoy. And you'll see that, little pieces of it start breaking off as ash and so forth. So that's all of this energy that's becoming released into the environment. Okay, so you can see all that energy, think of it as the heat and the light and so forth. But then what's left over once the fire has burned out? That piece of wood, that log, is just a little pile of ash. There's not very much of it left. So it's lost a lot of energy, right? And so the initial state had a lot, it's a big log, and then the final state is just like a pile of ashes. So we lost a lot of energy in that process. So that's an example of exergonic. So we started with a bunch, we ended with a little. So that was energy released into the environment, and that as the form of heat and light. And so that's a spontaneous reaction because it didn't require any energy to get started. The opposite is an endergonic reaction. So an endergonic reaction is where we end with more energy than we began with. Okay, so how do we get that? Well, we must have had some energy input in order for that reaction to take place. Okay, so an example of that would be, well, it could be like photosynthesis, muscle synthesis. So if you think about photosynthesis for a second, photosynthesis basically plant absorbs carbon dioxide and water. But in order for that carbon dioxide and water to be converted into sugar, glucose, and oxygen, it needs some energy from the sun. It needs light energy to be added to drive that chemical equation. Okay, so photosynthesis could not occur without energy from the sun. At night, do plants photosynthesize? No, they can't absorb that light energy from the sun. Okay, they can do the dark reaction, but they can't do the light reaction because it needs to have light present as the input. So that's an example of an endergonic reaction because energy has to be inputted into the reaction in order for the products to be produced. And that's going to result in a change in free energy as a positive number. All right, let's see. I'm gonna do that one. Okay, so here's a checkpoint question for you. Cellular respiration is an exergonic process. Remembering that energy must be conserved, what becomes of the energy extracted from food during cellular respiration? Okay, so let me go ahead and draw out the reaction. So in cellular respiration, you take in your nutrients in the form of sugars, so C6H12O6. And we also take in oxygen through respiration. And then we end up with converting that into carbon dioxide, which we exhale, and water, which we excrete. But there's one other thing that happens. We produce what? ATP. Okay, so that's energy. So respiration, cellular respiration is an exergonic process because energy is going to be released. Right? So remember, endergonic, we have to add energy. Exergonic, we release energy. So remember that energy must be conserved. So what becomes of the energy extracted from food? It is converted into ATP. Right? All right. Go ahead and erase all that. And that is so now we're going to get into, so we've talked about free energy. So now we're going to talk about coupled reactions. So when we're talking about a cell does three main kinds of work. So cells can have chemical reactions taking place. Cells can have transport, and cells can be mechanical, actually, produce things, build things, move things around. So in chemical work, we need ATP. So ATP is going to be added to the reaction in order to have, for example, our nutrients converted into a solid form or something like that. Okay. Transport work, same thing. We need ATP in order to allow something like active transport, transporting that protein, or excuse me, that substance out of the cell. Mechanical work, we have motor protein, needs to, with the help of ATP, move. Okay, so mechanical work being done. So all of these require the input of ATP. Now, how do we manage our energy resources? Well, cells, they can manage energy resources by energy coupling. So that's where energy couples use an exergonic process to drive an endergonic one. So remember, exergonic is a spontaneous reaction where energy is released. And if we can harness that energy that's being released from the exergonic, we can use that as the energy input for an endergonic reaction. And that's where our friend ATP comes into play. So most energy coupling in cells is mediated by ATP. So what is ATP? ATP, first of all, stands for adenosine triphosphate. So I don't know what happened with the formatting there, but let's take a look at the figure on the right. Okay, so adenosine triphosphate. So adenosine basically means that there is a sugar and an adenine or a nitrogenous base. Okay, so hey, that's if it has a sugar and a nitrogenous base. So if we look at this, it has a carbon, it has hydrogen, it has oxygen, it has nitrogen, and it has phosphate. So what type of macromolecule is ATP? It is a nucleic acid, okay, because it has the phosphate as well. And so we have the adenosine, so that's the ribose and the adenine put together. And then triphosphate, tri means three, so we have three phosphate groups. So that's what ATP is. So adenosine triphosphate. Okay. Let me erase all that. Okay. So how do we get ATP? Well, the hydrolysis of ATP, basically, right, if we take ATP and we have a reaction take place, it will end up releasing energy. So hydrolysis, if you remember, is the addition of water to break apart a molecule. So we're adding water to break apart ATP. And in that process, it releases an inorganic phosphate group. And so we end up with ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So you can see how we lost a phosphate group. And that process is an exergonic process because when we're removing something, it releases a burst of energy. Okay, so this is an example of an exergonic reaction. So now we have inorganic phosphate and ADP with some energy released. Okay. So we can use that energy that's being released and couple it together with other reactions to power those other reactions. All right. So for example, if we're trying to take glutamic acid and conversion to glutamine, it's here. So we have glutamic acid into glutamine. Glutamine includes, well, first of all, we have to have a reaction take place with the glutamic acid. We have an energy conversion of ATP to ADP plus phosphate. That's going to give us enough energy to phosphorylate that glutamic acid. And then that can then be used to add that glutamic acid to that nitrogen, that ammonia group or ammonium group to form glutamine. So we have two reactions taking place. We have one reaction which is an endergonic reaction, right? So let me show you. So this, bringing these two reactants together to form that, we have a positive number, so that's an endergonic reaction. ATP being converted to ADP and phosphate is a negative. Okay, so we couple them together, and the conversion of ATP to ADP plus phosphate provides the energy input to drive our reactants to form their product. Okay, so this is an example of energy coupling. We're combining an endergonic reaction with an exergonic reaction. Okay. All right, so this is basically just showing the same thing. So we have transport work. In order for that active transport to take place, we need energy to supply that for the transport protein to change its shape. And so that energy to change the shape of that protein, so it allows molecules to leave the cell, that energy that's required comes from the conversion of ATP to ADP and phosphate. So ATP phosphorylates transport proteins, provides the burst of energy to do that. So we have both chemical reactions are coupled. So exergonic is coupled with endergonic. And when it involves ATP, it's called phosphorylation. So we're taking the ATP, it's hydrolyzing to form ADP and a phosphate group. So that releases a burst of energy. And that burst of energy can be used for an endergonic energy process. Okay? But then when we have ADP plus phosphate, in order for it to be converted back into ATP, we need to couple that with an exergonic reaction that can provide that bit of energy to bring the ADP and the phosphate together to form ATP. So explain how ATP transfers energy from exergonic to endergonic processes in the cell. Okay, so just remember ATP is hydrolyzed to form ADP and phosphate. And in doing so, it creates a burst of energy. So that burst of energy can then be inputted into an endergonic process for a different chemical reaction to occur. So that's it for our mini lesson.